Frederick Douglass was born in a small house in a quarter of the village of Talbot, County Maryland, sometime in February of 1818. He was born into slavery and had a mother named Harriet Bailey and had 4 sisters and 1 brother. He and his family were poor and were slaves. Sadly, during his infancy, Frederick was separated and was taken away from his mother. All 4 of his sisters were sadly sold and auctioned off as slaves and were taken away as well. When Frederick Douglass was 9 and grew up to be a young boy, he moved to a plantation house to live with his slave master, Hugh Auld, and his family. He moved there to do chores around the house and to take care of Hugh's family. Since slaves were not allowed to go to schools, it was hard for young Frederick Douglass to get education. Over there, he met Hugh's mistress, Sophia Auld. She was the wife of his slave owner. Frederick was eager to learn to be schooled. He asked her if she would teach him to read and write, and she said yes. She was pleased to teach him lessons. When Hugh saw his wife teaching young Frederick Douglass to read and write, he wasn't too happy. He told his wife that teaching slaves lessons were never allowed. He said that teaching a Frederick to read and write would make him unfit to be a slave. He warned her that if slaves were exposed to education, then they would most likely to plan to escape from slave plantations and the slave owners would not be happy. Sophia became sad and disappointed that she understood where her husband was coming from. But that didn't stop Frederick Douglass from being educated. He learned words and mathematics from the Auld family and people around him. He soon learned to read and understand words from signs and newspapers. Frederick Douglass had a hard life as a slave. He was badly whipped and beaten up as he tried to use his own words to stand up for himself for education. He had not given up hope and had to be brave. One day, when Frederick Douglass was 16 years old, a furious slave owner came up to him to give him a whipping. As the slave master was about to give him a brutal whipping, Frederick had to act fast to stop him. As the slave master was about to strike him, Frederick quickly grabbed and swiped the whip away from him. The slave master became frightened. He finally gave up and fled away into the plantation field. In 1837, when Frederick Douglass was 19 years old, he met and fell in love with freed slave woman, Anna Murray. But Frederick Douglass was not yet freed, but did not want slavery get in the way of their love. Anna said that she would support him and help him to plan to escape from the slave plantations, since she was already freed and a member of the Underground Railroad. After Frederick escaped from the plantations by a train and was freed, Frederick Douglass and Anna Murray were married. They settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts. They had 5 children during their 40 years of marriage. While in Bedford, he went to a meeting house and to tell his story of his life as a slave and how difficult and brutal it was. On July 5, 1852, in Rochester, New York, the day after Independence Day, Frederick Douglass gave out his important speech. His speech was called, "What, to the Slave, is the 4th of July?" His speech was to abolish and to speak out against slavery. When the American Civil War broke out in 1861, most of the soldiers were white men. The Union Army was mostly made up with white soldiers. Frederick Douglass had an idea. He urged to enlist black soldiers to volunteer in the Union Army. So the 54th Massachusetts Infantry was established in 1863. In 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed by Congress to abolish all slaveries in the United States. On February 20, 1895, Frederick Douglass passed away in Washington, D.C. He was around 77 years old. Frederick Douglass was one of the most important people who have changed the world forever and was a hero who helped Abraham Lincoln to abolish slavery. If it weren't for him, we would not have Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks and many more of the heroes of the civil rights movements.